Hello to all the listeners of the Right Mind podcast, a podcast produced by the Institute of European Rights, a think tank based in Vilnius. My name is Teodoras, and I'll be guiding today's conversation. In the Right Mind podcast, we talk on various topics spanning from political theory to international affairs and beyond. It is my great pleasure to introduce our today's guest, Mr. Paul McCarthy. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Theodoras. It's really great to be with you today. Thank you for inviting me to the podcast.
Thank you for being with us. Paul McCarthy is a regional director at International Republican Institute, known as a IRI, a non-partisan organization from the US. Paul McCarthy works with the Europe region in the IRI capacity. Besides that, Paul McCarthy studied European and Russian history at the University of Pennsylvania and earned a master's degree in Russian studies from the LSE, London School of Economics. Is that right?
That is correct.
Brilliant. So first of all, one more time, thank you for being with us. And my first question would be, could you introduce our listeners what is an International Republican Institute?
The International Republican Institute was established during the Reagan administration. We've just celebrated last year our 40th anniversary. How time flies. IRI was established along with the National Democratic Institute and the Center for International Private Enterprise, and also a labor union institute, all at the same time by Congress, to have a balance of NGOs representing political parties, both political parties, business, and labor in the United States. Now, all four of these organizations, including IRI, are non-governmental organizations. So for your audience, it's important to understand that IRI is not affiliated with the Republican Party, nor is NDI with the Democratic Party. We draw our human resource strength from the political parties because we focus, and IRI focuses quite a bit, on political party development and elections throughout the world. We have over 60 offices around the world and presence in well over 70 countries with programs focusing on the political process, both political parties and civil society organizations. So established in 1983 with support from Congress, we continue to work very closely with the U.S. Congress in talking about what's important in democratic development around the world.
So the main mission of the IRI is the support for democracies throughout the world. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And this mission was as I understand, was original back in 1983 when President Reagan established this institute, IRI, in the later part of the Cold War years. So we had, of course, huge tensions at that time with the ambitious Reagan's program of Star Wars program, the tensions between U.S. and Soviet Union. Because of Soviet invasion to Afghanistan, as I remember reading about that, and IRI was established in that context.
Yes. Yeah. It was, in fact, in the early Reagan years. Reagan was president until 1988. We were founded during the first term of President Reagan. So certainly during the Cold War, well before the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, but definitely in the middle of some world-shaking events during the 1980s. And it was seen by Congress and the Reagan administration, I should say both political parties in Congress, that U.S. taxpayer funding should go to democracy promotion around the world to help struggling democracies, because back in the 1980s, most of the world was not democratic. There was, when you look at the Soviet Union alone, but also in Latin America and Asia, Africa, most of the countries were not democratic systems. And so it was seen as important for us to help reform reformers, people who believed in democracy, to bring about democratic change in their societies. So we saw in Latin America, in Nicaragua, for example, with the democratic awakening back in the 1980s, the change, the No movement in Chile, for example. A lot of things were happening at that time. South Africa was changing, and our organizations became involved early on in helping people get a voice and promote a democratic system.
Right, thank you. My next question is about the work that you do currently, as you are a regional director of Europe region in the IRI, and as I know, you work extensively with the Balkan region, which there's no secret. It is a quite troubled region. It had a lot of troubles back in the 90s, but particularly with the Balkan wars, with Yugoslavian disruptions, sort of. And how do you evaluate the current situation in the Balkan region? From my perspective, what I would say, if somebody would ask me, I would say that the Balkan region and most of the countries, if we think about the traditional Balkan region, the Serbia, Bosnia, and other countries, of course, Albania, Kosovo, they're in sort of a crossroads between let's say between the East and West. Of course, they are the democratic countries, but they have a lot of problems. You have a hands-on experience. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I've been involved in Southeastern Europe for over 30 years now, and so I've seen changes, generally good. I would just ask your listeners who may think that the situation in the Balkans is bad right now. Well, if we go back to when Milosevic was in power, there were full-blown wars. In Bosnia alone, over 200,000 people in a country of 4 million were killed, 500,000 or half the population displaced in that country.
And genocide beside that.
And genocide, of course. So we can't forget just how horrible the situation was at the turn of the new millennium. And now that Milosevic is gone, we still essentially what the problem of the Balkans comes down to is where the Serbs are going to go. Are they going to go in a democratic direction, or are they not? And this is particularly important in the countries where the Serbs live outside of Serbia, in Republika Srpska, in the entity in Bosnia, in Montenegro, for example, most importantly in Kosovo, in the north of Kosovo. Belgrade has so far not been very productive in helping Serbs outside of its borders become accustomed to a more democratic system. You even see in Montenegro, where a third of the population sees themselves as Serbs, a not very productive relationship. Serbs outside the borders look to Belgrade more than their own capitals, and then by extension to Moscow as well in many, many cases. And this is creating problems across the Balkan region, not to lay the nationalist problem solely at the feet of the Serbs. But the big question for us is Serbs living as minorities in other countries, and whether that can come to fruition, where they are living peacefully in democratic societies outside of Serbia. Within Serbia, and I want to underline, the Serbia question is the biggest question. It is the largest country that came out of former Yugoslavia, one of the largest countries in the Balkans. And it is where Belgrade goes is extremely important. Xi Jinping, President Xi of China, was just in Belgrade. It is quite clear that hopes aside that Serbia would forge a path to the West, or at least sit in two chairs for the time being, as one U.S. ambassador described it, a U.S. diplomat. unfortunately, I'm seeing Serbia looking more and more to the east and not to the west. And one wonders whether the government in Belgrade really is on a European path to join the European Union, whether it wants that or not. And I think it's important that the government in Belgrade stand up and say, yes, we are, because that's where the future of Serbia lies. Otherwise, they're going to remain in a gray zone between East and West, because we can't expect Moscow to, quote unquote, save Serbia from itself.
One more question about Serbia. I've studied in my PhD a period before the First World War, and Serbia was an essential variable in that puzzle of international politics before the First World War. I've read something about the current sort of a memory culture in contemporary Serbia. In 2015, for instance, in Belgrade, there was a new sculpture opens dedicated to Gavrila Princip, the famous, infamous and notorious, terrorist. We could call him a terrorist, a political assassin. Do you see this radicalization in the Serbian society, or is it just put it forward only by the political elite in Serbia?
Serbia's problem is partly historical, partly more recently historical, and this is the problem of a dominant group or ethnicity, however you will, who were in very strong ruling positions in in Yugoslavia's case, a former mini-empire. You see this also with Russia, grappling with the loss of empire. And I think Serbs in miniature are facing the same thing. And that might be one connection between Belgrade and Moscow that's not often thought of, that there is this, loss of a limb where you wish it were back, so to speak, but it can never come back. So that's part of it. You know very well, Theodoros, the long history of Serbia has caused problems for what we term the West now, and Gavrilo Princip is a major actor. I think we're still going through some of the trauma of the post-World War I situation over a century ago right now in Yugoslavia, and it's going to take some time to get beyond that. However, I think people are going to see that prosperity at the end of the day is becoming part of a broader Europe, a Europe whole and free, as we often say. And the Serbs have to be welcome in that. So I would also caution, I've been talking and warning the Serbs enough, I would also warn the West that we shouldn't hold at arm's length all the time people who are not doing what we want. I think we have to find ways to draw them in, and the Serbs are a perfect example of that. Hungary, more problematic, I would say, but at the same time, we have to find a way to reach out. Maloney found a way to reach out to Orban, for example, and that bore some fruit. But it's never going to be a straight path. There's going to be a zigzag, but we have to keep our eyes on the prize.
Yeah, you mentioned Milosevic. I just read that there are still former Milosevic establishment. People are still working in the Belgrade, various positions in Belgrade's government. And the last question, and we'll leave Serbia aside, is about the Kosovo. Quite regularly we hear about those skirmishes on the border, There is sometimes a talk of possible Serbian invasion to Kosovo. So how big is that problem still?
Oh, it's a huge problem. As I indicated earlier, of all the situations where there is a Serb minority living outside of Serbia, this is the one of two that could be a flashpoint for conflict. I expect the Kosovo conflict to be very, very difficult one to resolve because both the Serbs in the north, Belgrade backing them, and the government in Pristina are simply moving further and further apart from one another, making dialogue and ultimate negotiation that much more difficult longer term. And I'm very worried. We already saw a conflict last fall in the north. We could see more of that coming up. So it's really important that we remain engaged on this. Putin would love nothing better than us to provide a distraction in the Balkans that would distract us from the fight in Ukraine, that we need to support Ukraine against Moscow's invasion and depredations.
Absolutely. I thought I have a perfectly similar idea that it would be a dream of Putin for the one more conflict to start here, besides Ukraine, and of course besides the Israel-Palestine ongoing conflict. And the next question is about the what I would call and what is being called in the media anti-democratic axis. You already referred to China and China's Xi Jinping's visit to Belgrade, if I'm not mistaken, and of course he just recently landed in Budapest, in Hungary, meeting Orban. From your perspective, the general question, do you see an anti-democratic axis forming between China, Russia, Iran, and Hungary as a sort of a Trojan horse in the EU, and perhaps maybe Serbia and other rogue states?
Well, yes. The short answer to that is yes, and particularly between Russia, China, and to some extent Iran. Definitely between Russia and China. And anyone who doesn't see Beijing's support for Moscow and its war against Ukraine needs to wear glasses, I think, at the end of the day. So this is very much a problem. We have research that the IRI is doing. We call it the Nexus program. We just released a publication called the Authoritarian Nexus, how Russia and China work together in various places. Many countries around the world, Hungary and Serbia, because Xi Jinping was just there, are perfect examples of this. But you see them coordinating their efforts throughout different spaces around the world, primarily in the information space. Russia and China are different actors. China is interested in its investments and that its image in the world remains somewhat good, not necessarily in the West. I think they don't care about their image in the West so much, but they care about their image in Asia, broader Asia. They care about their image in Africa. And in other parts of the world as well. This is extremely important for them. And so their information efforts have to do with that. Russia is a destabilizing factor. It tends to split. But on Xi Jinping's recent trip, you saw him also trying to divide Europe by going to France, which is a country, although firmly rooted in the West, Macron has talked about strategic autonomy, about doing things separate. Xi Jinping would love nothing better than to divide the transatlantic relationship as much as possible when you're talking about France. When you're talking about Hungary, here's a country in the EU that is getting a lot of investments. It's more than just business, though. It's a political relationship where Orban has gone to Beijing. He's the only EU leader to have met Putin in Beijing after the start of the Ukraine war. So automatically right there, you see different strands coming together. So this is very, very important. I'll just say this because I don't often hear people saying this. It was a mistake for the United States to withdraw from Europe, generally speaking. I'm oversimplifying perhaps, but there was a feeling that the U.S. would would withdraw a little bit and that Europe would begin to take responsibility for its own problems. We saw this clearly in the Balkans, for example, that Europe would take over. It's quite clear right now that that U.S. leadership is needed again, while Europe builds up its defense portfolio, if you will, so that they are better able to defend themselves in the long run. But at this moment, it's extremely important that the West works together to fill a vacuum that these authoritarian actors have stepped into, because I firmly believe that we created a bit of a vacuum for them. And in advocating our positions forcefully and being on the scene, so to speak, more forcefully. And this is important, I would say, important for the Baltic states in particular, that the U.S. be there with its European partners as strongly as possible.
Mm. And if we refer to the anti-democratic, I said axis, you said nexus. Do you see the sort of the on the other side of a coin, the allies? I mean, the anti-democratic axis or the alliance. As I understand, your take is that within this alliance, within our alliance, there is a significant cracks, right?
Yes, I think they formed, but the Ukraine war has healed some of those divisions. I mean, we shouldn't underestimate just how far in the tragedy that the Ukraine war is, just how much this has strengthened transatlantic resolve. So it's extremely important. But cracks remain. I mean, we talked about Hungary. Countries within the European Union have different approaches to Ukraine. We are hopeful, for example, that after pronouncements by the German leadership that this is a watershed moment, that the Germans are going to stand up. They have certainly increased their military spending and support for the general effort. And a brigade is being, battalion or brigade, I can't remember, is being deployed in this region for the first time. I think Germans are getting over the sort of allergy that they had to deploying military force. I mean, rightly so because of the history, but I think the Germans are getting over that. That is a major development. So we will see. I will caution one thing, though, is that when looking at European politics as a whole, we're starting to see a move to the right in a lot of different countries around Europe. I am hoping that the rightward shift does not go in a direction of a pro-authoritarian nexus direction. For example, moving forward.
Yeah, the radical right, you mean, of course. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. The other question that I want to raise is about the status of the perception on the expansion of democracies throughout the world. I mean, do you believe that the world is still receptive to the expansion of democracy in this kind of a mental and sort of in philosophical, if I may say, grounds? Critics often points to Afghanistan and Iraq, suggesting that despite significant efforts by the U.S. and the West, these countries did not become successful democracies. How would you respond to that argument?
We have to look at the entire globe and not only focus on what are difficult situations that simply didn't work out. Countries have to be at the right moment in their histories to develop into full-blown democracies longer term. Look at the Baltic states compared to other republics of the former Soviet Union. You had built-in advantages that you used very, very well in building independent, stable, robust states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. It's very important to do that. That does not mean that we can't help build stronger political processes in countries that are not that far along as the Baltic states are. Every country is at a different level of development, and our programs seek to address these problems where the people are, essentially. So if it is simply helping, for example, women have been marginalized, helping them have a greater voice in the political process, we will continue to help those and make, sometimes it's incremental progress. So in response to people who criticize the type of programs that we do, and also greater lack of faith in democracy around the world, I would just turn them to, Winston Churchill's famous remarks, which is that democracy is the worst system except for all the rest. Democracy is the best in balancing interests, particularly in societies, multi-ethnic societies, and so forth. And it is the best way and most responsive way for people to express themselves and also to reach the goals that they want to reach.
Quite right. And the one of the last questions that I want to raise is about the sort of debate. It's not a very explicitly a debate. Sometimes it is sort of a implicit mood in the general society about the orientation, the contemporary orientation of Lithuania's foreign policy towards the what we call values-based foreign policy, and despite Lithuania's strong stance and actions against anti-democratic countries, first of all, of course, Russia, but China too, there are still influential voices in the Lithuanian society advocating for a more pragmatic and what they call a realpolitik based approach. Additionally, the very sensitive position is our president's position, which is quite ambiguous towards this values-based foreign policy that our foreign ministry is currently conducting and were conducting in the past 3.5 years. So, what would be your, if I may say, a message to Lithuanian policymakers and expert community who are debating these kind of issues?
I would say, first of all, I don't want to comment on domestic Lithuanian politics, in particular Lithuanian politicians. However, I would say for every country, particularly when it comes to China, in entering business agreements or long-term agreements with China for financing and so forth, know what you're getting into. Understand the strings attached, because there are now numerous examples. I would study Sri Lanka. I would study Montenegro to show you that the debt overhang problem that can happen if you get too deep with the Chinese. Because at the end of the day, just understand that Beijing cares about its own interests at the end of the day and not yours. And it's very important to understand that. I would also say with regard to Russian influence as well, particularly the energy equation, it is good to see Europe divesting from Russian oil and getting out of that situation, because that is a means of political and economic control that I think Europe will be better off without.
Thank you, Paul. My last question is if we've discussed very important matters. My last question is about what you think about Lithuania and Vilnius. We are speaking today on May 15th, beautiful sunny day in Vilnius. Is it your first time in Vilnius? And what do you make of Lithuania at 2024?
It's not my first time, but I haven't been to Lithuania in 15 years, I realize, which is too long. And I'm so happy to be back engaging with our friends. I often see my Lithuanian friends in other European capitals or in Washington more often than I do in Lithuania. So it's good to be here. It's good to see my friends in their domestic environment and working hard at politics. Vilnius is a beautiful city. I like the Lithuanian people very much. They're open. I could see if I lived here that it would be very easy to make friends. Open people, and the democracy since independence, the democracy you built is quite impressive. So I want to say congratulations to my Lithuanian friends, and it's great to be back after so long, and I hope to come back very soon.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul, for coming to our podcast and for having this conversation. I just want to remind our listeners that we've been talking with Paul McCarthy, Regional Director at IRI, in charge of Europe. Thank you for listening to the Right Mind podcast. I urge our listeners to invite your friends and relatives to follow the Right Mind podcast. Also follow us on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Spotify. Thank you for listening. Till the next time. Bye-bye.